Paul Champ is representing a group of residents and businesses. He's at the inquiry. Laura Berger is a staff lawyer with the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. She's with us from Montreal. Hi to both of you. Thank you very much for making time to react to this news. Mr. Champ, I will start with you. Why is it important, from your perspective, that the Premier testify before the inquiry?
Well, we've already heard considerable evidence that there was a number of discussions with Premier Ford, with the Mayor, and Mayor Watson was also hearing from Prime Minister Trudeau that they were having difficulty getting through to Premier Ford about how serious the situation was in Ottawa. And at the end of the day, you know, municipalities are provincial jurisdiction. The people and businesses of Ottawa were abandoned for 3 weeks, and you know, they deserve answers from their Premier.
Ms. Berger, lay out for me the case from your perspective for the Premier testifying, and his, I should say, his then Solicitor General as well.
Absolutely. Well, as Mr. Champ said, we had a situation that was clearly a pressing situation that affected a large number of Ontarians. And I think the buck stops with the Premier. The buck stops with the elected officials. Those are the people who are democratically accountable. I think it's also really important to keep in mind that the Emergencies Act Commission seeks to answer whether it was necessary to trigger the Emergencies Act and to create orders that restricted the civil liberties of Canadians right across the country. And we can't answer that question without knowing why the province acted as it did and why perhaps the province did or did not use all the tools at its disposal to resolve the situation in Ottawa.
And I should note for our audience two quick things, and we'll get into this in a second, but your organization has so far vocalized some opposition to the invocation of the act because of what you just laid out in part. And also I should let our audience know we have requested an interview with the Premier or a delegate or someone from the government on this issue to ask them themselves, and that request was declined. I do want to put a statement, part of a statement though, that the Premier's office sent us, Mr. Champ, in which they said, "We believe that questions about Ontario's institutional response will be sufficiently addressed by the testimony from the two senior officials already selected by the Commission." So there are kind of on the bureaucratic side, two officials who are scheduled to testify. "Overall, our view," the statement goes on to say, "has always been that this was a policing matter, and the police witnesses that are testifying can best provide the Commission with the evidence it needs." Certainly, we heard Interim Police Chief Steve Bell today with the Ottawa Police, Mr. Champ, talking a bit about the emergency, the invocation of the declaration, I should say, of emergency by the province and its effectiveness, what tools the police were availed of through that. Is that enough? I mean, that's basically what the Premier's office is contending.
You know, look, what was happening in Ottawa over those 3 weeks was completely unprecedented. It was lawless chaos, and the people and the businesses in downtown Ottawa felt completely abandoned by all three levels of government: the city, the province, and the federal government. And, you know, we're hearing, I think, quite candid answers from police and the Mayor that there were huge mistakes made. And we are going to be hearing from the Prime Minister. So, you know, if the Mayor and the Prime Minister can find the time to come here and answer the questions for the people of Ottawa, I don't know why Premier Ford feels he's exceptional. You know, the primary responsibility falls with the province, and you know, sometimes I think they believe that Ottawa's in a different country, but we're just a few hundred kilometers down the highway from Toronto, and you know, we would really appreciate if he came and answered the questions.
Ms. Berger, the Premier's contention through his spokesperson appears to be that the bureaucratic response and the questioning of police forces and the OPP, for example, is enough, that it does encompass the scope of the inquiry. Why is it, you know, do they have a point? Like, is a political voice on this necessary?
Well, what it comes down to is either the Premier of the province was briefed about the situation and was helping to make decisions, or he was completely hands-off at the time. Either one of those situations, I think, needs to be explained and laid out in front of the Commission of Inquiry. If, in fact, the Premier was completely hands-off, that's a truth that needs to be fleshed out, and I think that would be concerning in and of itself. Again, politicians, the Premier, MPs, MPPs, those are the people who are democratically accountable to Canadians and to Ontarians, and rightfully so. So in a democracy, we are entitled to demand accountability and transparency from our elected officials. I think the bigger question is, why is the Premier so afraid of giving evidence to the Commission that he's willing now to take the Commission to court and to resist the summons that Commission counsel have issued? The province is now seeking judicial review of that summons. To me, that's an extraordinary step to take. That's quite a step to take, simply to avoid answering questions and giving evidence in a forum that is aimed at devising recommendations for the future.
Let me just pick up on that point with you, Mr. Champ, because I'll read the part of the statement that alludes to that. The government will be seeking a judicial review, as Ms. Berger said, to set aside the summons and receive a stay under the grounds the summons are inconsistent with the member's parliamentary privilege. How do you interpret that?
Well, I mean, it's an excuse to get out of it. They're arguing that because the legislature is sitting right now, they can't be compelled to testify in any court or legal proceeding. They can try to hide behind that principle or that privilege, but that's what it looks like. You know, this isn't partisan politics. The people in Ottawa were really traumatized during that 3-week period. And I think they deserve to hear answers from all 3 levels of government about why they were let down so profoundly. And I think it's really disappointing that the Premier is going to say he can't take, a couple hours out of his day to give answers to the people in Ottawa.
Ms. Berger, I'll put the final question to you. The Premier did exactly a week ago say that he supported the federal government's use of the invocation of the Emergencies Act, that he stood shoulder to shoulder with the Prime Minister. So he has, articulated a position on all of this. And like he said through the statement, through his spokesperson, and in previous statements, he doesn't feel like it was the province's role to direct police forces, for example. In fact, he thinks that's the opposite of the province. So he has articulated his position on a number of these issues. I guess for audience watching at home, like what is the gap left to fill in? I know other politicians are testifying, but his response is as noted. How would you respond to that?
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting. I think we've seen in previous commissions of inquiry that dealt with policing of protest, for instance, the commissions that happened after the G20 protests and the arrests there, that this separation of church and state, this idea that politicians are never accountable for law enforcement or should never immerse themselves in law enforcement decisions. That's a questionable one. If indeed the Premier felt that he had no personal role and no responsibility over the situation that was unfolding in his own province, that's a position he can take. But I think Canadians deserve to hear that from him, and we deserve to get answers to those questions as opposed to answers mediated through officials.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much, both of you, for making some time on such a last-minute request. Really appreciate it. Paul Champ and Laura Berger. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.